Gospel of John, chapter 19. We're going to go through the whole 42 verses of it today. Got my 5 sections as usual. But first things first, Scott taught last week. He taught about Barabbas, the revolutionary, the guy who tried to cause a revolution against Rome. He was in prison because he murdered someone. He wasn't a good guy, and basically the crowd cheered for Barabbas to come be set free, and for Jesus to have to step in the place of Barabbas. So Jesus would die, Barabbas would be set free, even though Jesus was sinless, and Barabbas had caused a lot of problems and done a lot of sin, right? So this is where we kind of continue from there. They're saying, hey, don't kill this man. Don't set this guy free. Set free Barabbas instead. That's where we are. Verse 19 kicks off. We're going to start with section 1, verses 1 through 4. The soldiers mocking Jesus. So it says this: Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe, and said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they smote him with their hands. And Pilate therefore went forth again and saith unto them, Behold, I bring him forth to you, that ye may know that I find no fault in him. Okay, first word here, scourged. Okay, Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged. Scourge is kind of like a beating, punishment. He's going to throw something harsh at Jesus. So basically he's saying, Jesus came in, Pilate saw him, and then he basically said, beat this guy up. Make him look like he is getting a beating. Make him look bad. So when people see him, they may have a little bit of pity on him. But we know that Pilate isn't a very strong-boned person. He kind of waves and goes with the wind and goes with how the crowd are asking him to go. So he's basically trying to appease the crowd with a good beating, showing that Jesus is bloody, showing that Jesus has been whipped and beaten up. Maybe the crowd will turn around and say, that's enough, we can now set him free. But we know that's not what happens. But that's what kind of Pilate is saying. He's hoping that the mob will be appeased by the scourging, the beating. In Isaiah 50, verse 6, we can read about the physical punishment of the suffering servant. That's basically prophecy of saying this person is going to suffer in this way. And that's basically what happened with Jesus. There were beatings, there were whippings, he was kicked, he was spat upon, he was mocked. This is the type of suffering that Jesus went through. And Pilate gave the order for Jesus to be beaten. Right? The blows from the whip, sharp bones, pieces of metal at the ends of each leather strand. It was a cat of 9 tails. I don't know if you guys have heard of that before, but it's a whip with many strands at the end of it, and each of them would have a metal piece or a spike or a bone on the end. So when you whipped, it wouldn't just like leave those marks. It would dig in, and then it would pull back, aggressively back, and it would rip the skin. So it's a way of removing skin fast from someone, and not just kind of whipping them, but like ripping the skin off them as well, okay? Pretty aggressive. So quite often, a criminal would die from the beating before even making it to the cross, because these were pretty savage beatings. They would say, beat him to death -1. And they worked out that the average man would be able to stand 40 lashings. So they would say beating to death -1 would be 39. And they'd count it, 1, 2, 3, and each time those bones and those metal spikes, more skin, more blood, just horrible, just not nice. But this scourging, the scourged, the beatings, the punishment, and they had a couple of different purposes. The first one was to gain confessions. If you're getting beaten up and you're getting whipped and just your skin's getting ripped apart on your back, they want answers out of you. You're going to squeal. You're going to tell them what's going on, right? If you've got a plan, they're going to tell you. You're going to tell all your secrets. Or the second purpose was to weaken the victim so that death on the cross would come fast. So that's what Pilate's saying there. He took Jesus, he's replaced him with Barabbas. Barabbas is set free. Jesus is going in his place. He's being whipped, he's being beaten up, and it's all on Pilate's word. So verse 2, we can read that the soldiers, add to the beating, twisted together a crown of thorns and forced it onto his head, piercing his skull, blood dripping down. Matthew 26, 67 to 68 mentions this as well in more detail. And then they put this heavy purple robe, weighted and thick. Usually these robes were made, because it was a criminal's robe, out of sheep's wool, so it's super thick, super weight, like heavy, really heavy. And he's got those open cuts on his back, and now he's got something heavy pressing into them. And they'd leave it on him for a while. And we can read later on that they'd take it off, but they would rip it off. And what that would do was make sure those wounds on your back wouldn't be able to heal. It'd be like reopening a cut, picking that scab, and more blood coming out each time, right? So it's a rough first 2 verses here. But this robe was put on for punishment, but it was also put on to mock Jesus as King of the Jews. Right? Kings wear crowns, but not crowns of torture. The specific thorn bushes of the region have really sharp, long thorns. Okay, so this is a way that they can mock him, saying, "You're King of the Jews. Well, here's your king's crown of thorns. I'm going to push that over your head." And kings would wear purple because the dye to make fabrics, that color was very expensive. It was a royal color. But this purple robe was intended as a cruel irony, as mocking. Right? It wasn't for the reason why we would say "Hail Jesus." They would say mocking him and bowing down, bending the knee just to slap him in the face again. They would say in verse 3, "Hail, King of the Jews." And again, to go with the crown and to go with the robe, kings are greeted with royal titles, but in spite they mocked Jesus with this title. It was meant to be a humiliation. But actually, it was just telling him exactly who he was. He was King of the Jews, right? And then they struck Jesus with their hands. What does that mean? Are you allowed to go near? Are you allowed to go near kings and queens? Yeah. What do they always have around them? They have guards. They have soldiers. They have their personal guards. If you go near them, "Hey, excuse me, not allowed to go around." This is a very important person. Think about the Pope. What does he drive around in? His bulletproof car, right? It's got a little cage on top of the car so he can be sat on his seat and waving at people. What's that driven by? His security team. What's the 2 cars in front? What's the 2 cars behind? His own personal security squad. You're not allowed to go near these people. They're royalty. They're very important. Don't go near them. These Romans are able to go up to the King of the Jews and slap him in the face. Not even just to go close to him, actually touch, hurt, offend him. One after another after another. The Gospel of Matthew also added that Jesus was stripped down naked, given a reed as a mock scepter, and the soldiers bowed their knees before Jesus and then struck him and spat on him. Each Gospel kind of tells you a little bit different versions of this. But again, that's the beauty of the Bible. It tells you different angles, right? Different understandings. And then in verse 4, Pilate comes out again, out to the crowd and says, "Now, I need you to know I find no fault in this man. I find no fault in him." And Pilate is repeating himself to the crowd the same words that were said in John 18:38 when he first found Jesus. "I don't think there's anything wrong with this guy. You want him dead, but I don't think it's right." But Pilate is declaring that Jesus is innocent. And as a judge, as a governor, Pilate had both reason and responsibility to set Jesus free with no punishment, instead of the humiliation and brutality that he endured. So he didn't have to do that. The reason why he did it was to try and appease the crowds, right? We understand that. Pilate didn't have a backbone. Pilate wasn't willing to step out and be like, "I'm going to let Jesus free," in case the crowds turned against him. In case the crowds turned against him and said, "We don't want you as governor." Pilate liked his position. Pilate liked his job. It was pretty cushy, right? But Pilate, there are several instances that Pilate says this, and he tried to do these weak attempts to set Jesus free. We can read that in Luke 23:4, Luke 23:15, Luke 23:20, and Luke 23:22. Also in John 19:4, just as we just read, 19:12, we're going to read a little bit, and 19:13. So there's at least like 7 or 8 instances where Pilate is actually saying, "You really want to kill this guy? Do you not think we should let him go?" But they just weren't very strong. Pilate didn't have a strong backbone. He couldn't stand up and actually aggressively say, "No, this is what's going to happen. I'm governor, and I'm going to deal with the consequences afterwards." He just wanted to please the people. He's a people pleaser instead of actually sticking to the law. Okay. So section 2, verses 5 to 16, is Pilate's decision. Pilate's decision over all of this. So we're going to look here at verses 5 to 16. Then came Jesus forth, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate saith unto them, Behold the man. When the chief priests, therefore, and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, Take ye him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. Again, repeating himself, he's done nothing wrong. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. And when Pilate therefore heard that saying, he was more afraid. Oh man, why did you do that? I was going to try and back for you here. I was trying to get you out of this situation, and you gone and done that. You gone and told them that you were the Son of God. Now they're not going to stop. Verse 9, And went again to the judgment hall, and saith unto Jesus, Whence art thou? Where'd you come from? Where'd you come from? But Jesus gave no answer. Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee, and I have power to release thee? Jesus answered, Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivereth me unto thee have the greater sin. And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth, sat down in the judgment seat in a place that is called the Pavement, but in the Hebrew, Gabbatha. Verse 14, And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he saith unto the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate saith unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. Verse 16, They delivered him therefore unto them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away. So verse 5, there's a lot in this, by the way, it's crazy. But verse 5, Jesus was brought out to the crowd, wearing the crown, wearing the robe, bloodied face, beaten up, black eye, whatever it is, like tons of blood all over him, spit and everything like that. And Pilate shouted, Behold the man. Notice that he says, Behold the man. Later on he says, Behold your king. He's trying to get them to recognize who Jesus is. And they're saying, No, he's a man, kill him for saying that he is a king. Because if anyone says they're a king, they're against Caesar. And if you think he's a king, then you're against Caesar. Now Pilate is pretty scared of Caesar. He's pretty scared of losing his position. So when he had that threat put at him from the crowd, that's a pretty nerve-wracking experience. Hey, if you say he's king, you're going to lose your job. You might die. Caesar's going to come and get you. That's enough to make you scared. So Pilate presented Jesus to the crowd as beaten and mocked and bloody and sweat-covered and spat upon. And this sad sight would hopefully make the crowd feel sorry for Jesus. But instead, in verse 6, we can read that the religious leaders are hyping up the crowd to say, Crucify him instead. They're hyping him up by saying, Hey, get him out of here, get him out of here, get him away, crucify him, crucify him. And this was pure hatred from man to God. Because pity could have stirred in the crowd, right? And a little bit of remorse could have stirred in the crowd, but instead, it was quickly stamped up by the religious leaders, by the priests. They're the ones that are then saying, actually, we don't recognize this guy as Son of God, we recognize Caesar as king instead. They're making their understanding of who Caesar is more important than who Jesus is. And for the third time, Pilate pronounced Jesus innocent of all charges, but all of his respect and all of his responsibility and all of his strength had been depleted by the crowd shouting out, Crucify him, crucify him. In verse 7, we can read that they say, We have a law, and we should abide by the law. Well, it's really funny that you would say about the law, because they're breaking the law with that unrighteous trial that they just had with Pilate. There was no reason to take Jesus to trial. He had done nothing wrong. They had no grounds, but they knew the law. The religious leaders knew the law. And because he has made himself the Son of God, he must die. Because he said those words, he's got to go. He's going to die. He's going to be out of here. And in John's account, the religious leaders showed their true charge against Jesus. They wanted him dead, not because he claimed to be the king of the Jews, but because he claimed to be God, this true Son of God, right? King of the Jews was a mocking term for them now. They were more offended by him saying that he was the Son of God. In verse 8, we can read that once Pilate heard this, he was more afraid. Pilate was not angry or amused when he learned that Jesus made himself the Son of God. He was more afraid than ever. Well, you just ramped up everything. Because if you're a murderer, I know how to treat murderers. If you're a thief, I know how to treat thieves. But you know what? You're turning around and saying that you're the Son of God? I don't know how to handle this. I can imagine Pilate thinking, I just thought this was going to be an easy day today. And this is just completely out of my depth. I don't know what to do here. You did what? You said what? They think you're what? Are you kidding me? But even with that, Pilate saw something in Jesus. Something in Jesus where he wasn't confessing. He wasn't begging. He wasn't on his knees crying. He was standing there, beaten, bloodied, spat upon, being more than just a man, being more than just a criminal. So then, in verse 9, we can read that Pilate went back to the praetorium, or the judgment hall, right? And said to Jesus, where did you come from? Where are you from? From whence art thou? Pilate was looking for a way out. He was looking for a way for Jesus to defend himself. He wanted Jesus to explain what made him different to all the other dozens of prisoners that Pilate had judged. He's going to judge 3 people on this day. What makes you stand out from the other 2 criminals who are going to be crucified? What makes you different? But Jesus had already answered this question in John 18:36. He was from the kingdom of heaven, not of this world. And because Jesus had already answered that question, he did not answer it again. Jesus does that a few times where he's like, I've already given you the answer, and if you weren't listening then, why would you listen now? And he says that to a couple of different people, the rich man, stuff like that for the Gospels. And it's really interesting to know that, actually, Jesus himself wasn't saying answer after answer after answer. He's basically saying, you didn't listen then, you won't listen now. I'm not going to waste my breath on doing this. When Jesus did this often, the answer he gave was the answer. It was the truth. It's still the truth even if you don't accept it. So not saying that this was a bad question at all. Pilate was asking a good question because we all need to understand and know where Jesus is from. But Pilate was asking for the wrong reasons. We can say, oh God, if you're from heaven, if Jesus, you're from heaven, show me something. And Jesus will do that. You know, if we knock on that door, it will be answered. If we ask for an answer, Jesus will give us the answer. It may not be the answer we're looking for. But Pilate was looking to save his own skin, not for Jesus' sake, right? Verses 10 and 11, Pilate basically did not believe and could not believe that Jesus would not speak to defend himself. He couldn't believe that Jesus wasn't begging for his life. He couldn't believe that Jesus didn't have these answers that he wanted from him. But he also couldn't believe that Jesus wasn't intimidated by the representative from Rome that was judging him. I'm a governor. How can you not be intimidated by the presence, my power, my position? But the silence from Jesus fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah 53:7. And it says this, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Right? When that happened, he was fulfilling yet another promise from God. But do you not know that I have power? Said Pilate. Do you not know that I'm from Rome? Do you not know that I'm the governor? Do you not know that I am responsible for all this land and all these people and I have such amazing power? But Pilate had the wrong power. He had power to harm and to judge. He didn't have the power to do what was right. The right thing is obviously set an innocent man free instead of sending him to death. But all of Pilate's strength was gone. It was evaporated. It was gone from the religious leaders shouting and cheering in the crowd, crucify him. And that same man, Pilate, who claimed to have all the power, tried to wash his hands of this very decision. Right now, where we are right now in the Gospel of John 19:10-11, we can read in Matthew 27:24, when he says basically, I find no fault, I'm going to wash my hands with him, and I'm going to pass him on to you. He's nothing to do with me anymore. The same guy that says he has some crazy power doesn't really have much power. But Jesus answered in 11 here, he said, you have no real power unless it's been given you from above. You think you have power, but really you have nothing. Pilate thinks that he has all the power, but in fact God has all the power. Rome wasn't all powerful. Pilate wasn't all powerful. Even the religious leaders churning up the crowd were not all powerful. God is the only true power. And that's what Jesus is saying here. God is the only true source and giver of power. The only one who delivered me to you has the greatest sin as well. Think about that for a second. He's saying you don't have power. Rome doesn't have power. Your position means that you don't have power unless it's been given to you by God. Right? And then he's saying, he that delivereth me unto thee have the greater sin. Those people who brought me to you are the only ones who have greater sin than what you're doing right now. What you're doing is sinful. They did the greatest sin by lying and cheating and bringing me to you now on false pretenses. He's talking about the religious leaders. He's talking about Judas. He's talking about all the plans and plots that they had to bring him to trial him, to kill him. In verse 12, we can read that Pilate sought to release Jesus, because there's a panic now. He hasn't got the answers for the crowd. He hasn't got the answers from Jesus that's going to help him. The panic was greater than the panic when his wife, we can read in Matthew 27, 19-20, she had a dream about this moment. And she says to Pilate, set him free. Don't judge this innocent man. Don't judge him. But Pilate knew this innocent man, a man not like any other prisoner that he had before, that he should be set free. Yet, he felt the full force of the crowd and the religious leaders demanding his crucifixion. Have you ever tried to do that? People are shouting at you about something, you're just trying to get an answer out, but they keep shouting at you, and you can't get your words to even be heard because it's just such a loud crowd. It takes a lot of strength and energy and passion and desire to stand up against that, because that can be very tiring. But if you let this man go, they said, if you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Pilate was an unremarkable man who only had his position because he married the granddaughter of the emperor. The only reason he had this position was by relationship. But Pilate would be greatly concerned that that relationship would be damaged. The religious leaders and the crowd knew Pilate's weak point, and so they pressed upon it. Hey, if you're not a friend of Caesar, we can just tell him he can come and kill you. He can take you out of power. So when Pilate heard this, in verse 13, he went back and he brought Jesus to the judgment seat. To the judgment seat. And at this point, Pilate was ready to deliver his final judgment. He had heard enough. He did his trial. He's seen Jesus beaten. He's seen them mocked. He's seen them spat upon. He's went to the crowd. He's talked to them. He's come back, and now he's saying, give me answers, Jesus. And Jesus isn't giving him the answers. So now he's saying, right, we're going to the judgment seat. I've got my judgment ready to go. I am the judge. I am the governor. I have all power. You will listen to me. You will respect my decision. Here it is. The decision to pass on to Jesus and to say, crucify him. If you want to crucify him, take him. Take him. The Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, John 1:29, is ready for sacrifice. And it says, at Passover. We read in verse 14, it says, the preparation of the Passover. And this is interesting because when you think about timeline, John does a really great job of mapping out timeline. John does a really great job of telling us what's happening around. So now he's saying Passover. And there's a mention of a 6th hour. And this is one of the most controversial moments in the Bible, because in Mark it talks about a 3rd hour is when Jesus is crucified. And John's saying a 6th hour. So people don't really understand what that is. I tried to look into it. It is too long for me to try to explain to you right now. But I would encourage you to go and read. Read your Bibles. Read about the context of what they're talking about. But the important thing is not necessarily that the timing is wrong. They're both writing about the same thing. Okay? And I think that's important to think about. Okay? Crucifixion happened. Timing is important. But when you have so many witnesses writing about the same thing, it makes it a little less important. It's still important, but it's something to think about. Okay? So at the end of 14, we see Pilate come up and he says to the crowd, to the Jews, and he says, "Behold your king. Behold your king." And Pilate seems to be speaking with great sarcasm now, right? Bringing Jesus up to the crowd, presenting the king with a crown of thorns, a heavy purple robe across his ripped open back. "This is your king. Behold him. Put your eyes upon him. Look at him and understand why you can't be a king if you're not Caesar." The crowd saw Jesus in this state, and they cheered on. By the religious leaders, they cried out, verse 15, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" The shouting unified one message: crucify him. The same crowd that was crying out, "Hallelujah! Hallelujah! Praise be to God!" a few days ago, are now shouting for Jesus' death. The message from the crowd is clear: get him away from us, kill him. And Pilate shouted back, "Shall I kill your king?" And the chief priests, think about this for a second, they are priests of a temple. The chief priests say, "We have no king but Caesar. We have no king but Caesar. We don't worship God or the Son of God. We worship Caesar. He's our king." And the crowd rejected Jesus and chose Barabbas. The priests rejected the Son of God and chose Caesar. And they both chose the revolutionary against Rome and swore their allegiance to Caesar. There's a lot of things going on in that verse right there. Verse 16, Pilate then delivered him to be crucified. Pilate lacked character. Pilate lacked courage. Pilate compromised. Pilate was swayed by the world. And with those decisions, Jesus was handed over to be crucified. Section 3. The King on a cross, verses 17 to 27. 27. "So, and he, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him, and two with him on either side, and Jesus in the midst. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and it said, and writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew and Greek and Latin. Then said the chief priests of the Jews to Pilate, Write not the King of the Jews, but that he said, I am the King of the Jews. And Pilate answered, What have I have written? I have written. Then the soldiers, when they crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts, so that every soldier a part, and also his coat. Now the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout. They said therefore among themselves, Let us not rend it, but cast lots for it. For those, whose it shall be, that the scripture might be fulfilled, which saith, They parted my raiment among them, and for my vesture they did cast lots. These things therefore the soldiers did. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple standing by whom he loved, he saith unto his mother, Woman, behold thy son. Verse 27, Then saith he to the disciple, Behold thy mother. And from that hour the disciple took her unto his own home. Okay. This is the brutal part. Verse 17, he was bearing his cross. According to Roman custom, the prisoner, Jesus in this instance, would have to carry their own cross from the judgment seat or judgment place, the place of sentencing, to the place of crucifixion, to the place of the skull, to Golgotha. Right? And it would have been that cross beam that would have been right across him. And some pictures have the whole cross there, but we don't know how much of this weight was on him, but it was a lot. After the beatings, after the 40 minus 1, after all the spit, after the kicking or the slapping and the beatings, everything like that. Before the Romans put the man on the cross, they put the cross onto the man, forcing him to carry it in a public procession with all the crowd cheering, all the crowd intending to draw attention to the condemned criminal. In Genesis 22, 6 to 14, we can read about Isaac, who is told to carry the wood up the hill to the top of the mountain to be a sacrifice to God. He didn't know that he was going to be a sacrifice of God's, but that's another way that we see God providing a lamb to be the substitute instead of us having to go through it. Jesus is the substitute for all of our sins. The Romans used crucifixion as their means of execution. That was one of the most famous ways of doing it. It was reserved for the worst criminals and for the lowest classes. Crucifixion was designed specifically to make the victim die slowly, publicly, with great pain and humiliation, right? And this is the form of death that Jesus had submitted to for the will of God to go through. Crucifixion was truly awful and so degrading that it typically would not be talked about in public. Romans wouldn't talk about it because it was so bad, right? And the gospel writers do not give detailed explanation of the crucifixion because there are a couple of reasons here. The original readers of the gospels were familiar with what happened at crucifixion. If you can't talk about it, then why would you write about it? Okay? It was so bad they didn't need to explain it. And also, think about it this way. The writers were not trying to use language or descriptions to manipulate emotions. Because if you feel sad for someone, you're going to be more swayed to their side, right? If you feel upset about something, your emotions are going to play into how you make decisions instead of actually just thinking with your brain. Okay? They weren't trying to play with emotions, they were simply trying to tell the story. The suffering of Jesus was physical, but more so, it was spiritual. Verse 18, they crucified him and 2 others with him, one on either side, Jesus right in the middle. Okay, there were 3 scheduled for crucifixion on that day. The other 2, criminals and Barabbas, but Jesus had taken the place of Barabbas. This was another way that Jesus was identified with sinners in his death, because he had to walk the same walk as all the other criminals did. He is a criminal just like they are. The Son of God, the criminal, the thing about this, awesome thing. Think about the 3 people hanging there on the cross on that day. You had the Son of God in the middle, you had the criminal who mocked, who was the unrepentant sinner, and then you had the criminal who confessed, who believed, and who would then have a seat in heaven. You have 3 different types of people there, right? Jesus right in the center. We have a choice. You can be unrepentant, or you can be the repentant criminal. Matthew 27, 46 to 49 tells us that Jesus cried out in agony and that he was mocked for his cries out, right? In Luke 23, 39 to 41, we can read that both criminals mocked Jesus, but one changed his heart towards Jesus. So think about this for a second. The last voice, the last testifying voice to Jesus was the voice of a criminal condemned to death. The last person saying, "This is God," was a criminal. The disciples were gone. All the people that Jesus had taught were gone. All the people that Jesus had healed had gone away. They're nowhere to be found. The religious leaders mocked him, spat upon him, and even the faithful women who were in the presence right there were silenced from what they'd seen, the agony and the grief from what they're looking at. Yet there was one voice still testifying that Jesus was God, and he didn't deserve to be up here, and that was the criminal on the cross. Verse 19, Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and this was according to Roman custom. The one who was to be crucified would have their name and their title hung around their neck as they carried the cross. Right? It's kind of like an identification card. It said Jesus proclaimed he was Son of God. Jesus, King of the Jews, right? And then that title was nailed to the top of the cross so that everyone would be able to see it. Okay? But the writing that he wrote there was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. The same name in which was identified and arrested by in the Garden of Gethsemane. Back in John 18:5, when they said, "Are you Jesus? We're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." And Jesus said, "I am he." Right? Scott talked about that really well, really clearly, and it was great to kind of have that. But he's using the same identification. That's what he's looking for. He also wrote what the crime of Jesus was: the King of the Jews, or at least the charge that was brought to him. This claim that he was in fact the King of the Jews was correct, right? But even in his death, Jesus was identified with humble and obscure Nazareth. Tiny little place, Nazareth. What good thing comes out of Nazareth, right? That's what we've read before. Even in his death, Jesus was recognized as king. Jesus is the king. But this is the difference. Typically, kings get the throne after the previous king dies, right? A prince gets bumped up, gets that promotion to the king once their dad dies. In Jesus' death, he was proclaimed as king to the whole world. And the description of the King of the Jews was just that, a description of who Jesus truly is. Descriptions about the other criminals were of the crimes they'd done: murderer, thief, whatever it was, right? However, Jesus was the King of the Jews, so that's what was written. That's what his crime was. In verse 20, we can read that many of the Jews read this title. Where the crucifixion happened was just right outside of the city. It says just nigh of the city. The Romans wanted the crucifixion to be in a very public place. Many eyes to see it, right? They wanted many eyes to see the victims, the criminals hanged to their death. They wanted many eyes to read about the crimes. Don't do what they did, because look what happened to them, right? They wanted many eyes to see what happened when they commit crimes against the empire. Hebrews 13:12 tells us about that a little bit more. But then it says this incredible thing in verse 20 at the end here. It was written in Hebrew, it was written in Greek, and it was written in Latin. So this statement was made as public as possible, but so that all can read it. All the people coming through could read it. So Aramaic for local inhabitants, right? Hebrew. Latin for all the officials, all the higher-ups, all the teachers, all the scholars, right? And then Greek for the rest of the world. Everyone needs to read this message. Everyone needs to know that if you proclaim to be King of the Jews, you will die for it. Verse 21 and 22, finally we find out that Pilate has a little bit of a backbone. Do not write the King of the Jews, but he said, I am King of the Jews. The religious leaders still have a problem with what Pilate is doing. They still have an issue with the way that this is being handled. Pilate, you're doing it wrong. Don't write that. Write this instead. But you know what? Pilate responded, what I have written, verse 22, what I have written, I have written. Finally, Pilate found a backbone, finally stood up, ready to go, ready to fight back a little bit, but it's not exactly the most important matter. It's just his title. But Pilate still stood up, because the Roman laws did not allow changing of the title once it had been written. Okay, we read that in Daniel before. We read that in other places in the Old Testament as well. As soon as the title was pronounced, as soon as it was written into existence, it could not be changed. Okay, when we went through Esther as well, we found out about that when they said about the killings and the murderings of all certain types of people, and how the king was tricked into that and not able to change the writings of it. But what was written cannot be changed. In verse 23, the soldiers who had beaten, whipped, mocked, and spat upon Jesus took Jesus' stuff. It says they took his garments and made 4 parts. So they cut his clothes into 4 ways. And then they took this coat. But this coat was pretty special. Okay, they stayed by the cross to keep order and to make sure the condemned actually died. But since it took a while, typically it would take a couple of days, the soldiers took it and shared the possessions of the criminals. They gambled a little bit and awarded the winner with a tunic from Jesus' back, his coat from his back. And what we can read there is that Jesus let go of everything when he went to the cross. Even the clothes he had, even his clothes. Becoming completely poor so that we could be rich in him. The tunic that was made for Jesus was high quality. It was woven out of one piece. That means it wasn't sewed together as one piece of cloth folded over. And they were like, wow, this is really rare. But this was the same design that the high priest would wear back in Exodus 28, 31 and 32. It was valuable so the soldiers did not tear it up, which surprisingly meant that they, in doing that, fulfilled a prophecy in Psalms. In Psalm 22:18 specifically, if you want to check that out. And at verse 25, we read about who's there at the cross. There stood by the cross of Jesus, his mother. It is hard to understand all that Mary was going through, all the agony, the sadness, the pain that she was going through as her son went to the cross. She witnessed it all. And next to Mary was her sister, Mary, the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. These faithful women were there throughout Jesus' ministry to the agony of the cross, all the way through to the agony of the cross, to honor and support him and to support his mother. These are the same Marys who discovered the tomb empty in the next couple of chapters, the evidence of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Verse 26, there also stood next to his mother was the disciple of whom he loved. This is the author John's humble way of referring to himself in this story. Every time you read the disciple of whom Jesus loved, he's saying, I am the disciple that Jesus loved. That was me. That's me in the story right now. It's kind of funny. And he does this 4 times in the gospel. John 13:23, John 19:26, John 21:7, and John 21:20. But John was there at the crucifixion and was able to tell us what he saw with his own eyes. And when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple next to her, he said this to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." But Jesus cared for his mother all the way to the end. His attention was on others, not on himself, even on the cross. Even to the point of not saying his mother's name. Because how horrible would that be? Your son is on his own way to death. He will die. And he could say, Mom, Mary, Mother, whatever. But what grief that would bring on her, right? Instead he says, woman, look to your son next to you. Look to the guy next to you. He's now your son. He's going to take care of you. He's going to look after you. He'll be there for you. And from that hour, it says, the disciple took Mary into his own home, into his own family, and looked after her. John obeyed this command and took Mary into his own home. When it gets us to section 4, 28 to 37, it is finished. So verse 28, after this, Jesus, knowing that all things were now accomplished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, I thirst. Now there was set a vessel full of vinegar, and they filled a sponge of vinegar and put it onto hyssop and put it into his mouth. When Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, it is finished, and he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. The Jews therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not be remaining upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath day was an high day, besought Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Then came the soldiers and brake the legs of the first and of the other, which was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, they brake not his legs. But one of the soldiers with a spear pierced his side, and forthwith came out there blood and water. And he that saw it bare record, and his record is true, and he knoweth that he saith true, that ye might believe. For these things were done, that the scripture should be fulfilled. A bone of him shall not be broken. Verse 37, and again another scripture saith, they shall look on him whom they pierced. I thirst, Jesus said. So Jesus was thirsty, and he wanted to say one more thing. And we read that in verse 29 again. He had the sour wine that was in the vessel, or the vinegar. The price had been paid, and Jesus was ready to announce it, but he wanted to say something clearly, okay? And when the sinner says, I thirst, to Jesus, the worst is over. When we say to Jesus, I thirst, I need you, Jesus will satisfy, just like the criminal on the cross next to him. But this message had to be said, right? So verse 30, Jesus received the vinegar. He said, it is finished. Jesus had paid the ultimate price, the eternal price on the cross, the foundational work of the Christian faith, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The veil was torn, the earth shook, it was truly finished on that day. The skies got dark, and what did the soldiers say? Truly, truly, this was the Son of God. And you can read that in the other Gospels accounts, but we can also see that the promises were finished. The prophecies were finished. The sacrifices were finished. The ceremonies, it was all finished. And Jesus bowed his head and gave up the ghost. A peaceful act, like laying down on a pillow to sleep, Jesus bowed his head. He did not hang his head in defeat, but in fact peace and victory. He knew why he was going to the cross. He knew what he was there for. And death had no hand over the sinless life of Jesus, the Son of God. He stood in the place of sinners, but was never a sinner himself. So Jesus could not die unless he himself gave up the Spirit. So that's what he did. Okay? Verse 31, the bodies could not remain on the cross as it was the Sabbath. Coming up to the Sabbath, guys, we need to get these guys cleared out because we can't do any work on the Sabbath. So to hurry things up, the Jews asked Pilate to break the legs of the criminals so they would die faster. And typically, crucifixion would last up to like 3 to 4 days. Unless you're really strong, maybe 5 days. So the punishment would last as long as the victims physically could hold out. Okay? But because of the approaching Sabbath, the leaders demanded that the Romans take away the criminals by breaking their legs, getting rid of that support. So when you're on the cross, your feet are on that little platform, or they're nailed to the actual beam itself. but you're able to use your legs to lift yourself up, to take another breath before you sink back down again. But you'd be using your legs a lot to kind of bring yourself up. So you break the legs, you're hanging by your arms. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the criminals, and it quickened their death, basically. Verse 33, they came to Jesus and already found him dead. Verse 44, we can read that the soldiers pierced Jesus' side and with a spear, and water and blood came out. And this was a confirmation that Jesus was actually dead. The stab wound from the spear flowed forth with a substance that looked like blood mixed with water. Verses 35 to 37, John is basically saying the reason why he's saying all these things, that he was present at the crucifixion of Jesus and saw all these things with his own eyes. He did all of that. He recorded everything. He's writing down everything so that all who read this may believe. Remember, the reason for John, the Gospel of John, right at the very beginning, was to prove that Jesus was the Son of God, right? He is the actual Son of God. That's why John went about to actually do all of these things. Now, he's saying, I'm saying about all this stuff, the horrible stuff that's happened as well, not just the miracles, not just the teaching, not just the healing, not the walking on water, everything like that. This is the painful stuff. And I'm telling you, I'm still telling you so that you may believe. So again, with the piercing of the side of Jesus, another prophecy was fulfilled. We can read that in Psalm 34:20, in Exodus 12:46, and Numbers 9:12 again as well. Okay, final section 5. Jesus is buried in Joseph's tomb, verses 38 to 42. And after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, besought Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him leave. He came therefore and took the body of Jesus. And there also came also Nicodemus, which are the first to come to Jesus by night, and brought a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100-pound weight. Then took they the body of Jesus and wound it in linen, clothes with the spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein was never man yet laid. There laid they Jesus, therefore because of the Jews' preparation day for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. So Joseph of Arimathea, along with Nicodemus, secretly they were disciples, but they had fear of being around other people who they might try and kill him if they knew about that. They took the body of Jesus and they buried it. And the way they did this, it's written, is that they did this on their own. Imagine that, just two guys taking him out of the way, away from the crowds, away from all this and doing this and that. We know that Joseph and Nicodemus were both wealthy and influential men. We can read that in Matthew 27:57, Mark 15:43, and John 3:1. We've already learned all about these guys. Which means they could have actually brought servants to do this instead. But they didn't. They did this on their own. That's why this is important. Myrrh and aloes were supplied to be smeared all over the body of Jesus, dipped the wrappings into, so it was not make the dead body smell. Right? We know about Lazarus and how they wrapped him up and everything like that. And they said after 3 days, oh man, it's going to be stinky in there because of the heat. So they were doing the same thing for Jesus, the same treatment. You smear the body, you'd soak the hair in this oil, in this myrrh, and this aloe, and then you put all of the stuff all over the wrappings and you'd wrap that body up tight. And Jesus' body was prepared to be buried the way that the Jews would say. And you can read in verse 41 that there was a garden tomb where no one had been laid. Matthew 27:6, he tells us that this is Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, a rich man's tomb, right? Joseph, the same guy that's wrapping up Jesus, is willing to give him, Joseph's final resting place. But significantly enough, the fall of the first Adam, back in Genesis, took place in the garden. And it was in the garden when the second Adam redeemed mankind from the consequences of the fall. There's a good wraparound here, right? There's good things happening here. And then the stone was rolled in front of the entryway of the tomb. Guys, that is John 19. I've got 3 final points for you, and then we'll pray. First one here, Jesus is on trial. How firm is your faith? How firm is it?
Isn't Nicodemus the guy, the rich guy who asked Jesus, like, the born again thing?
How do I be born again? Yeah.
Oh, he's the same name?
Yeah. Same name as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. Second point, Jesus is beaten. Times will get worse. That's what the Bible tells us, is we're going to have problems, right? How sure is your salvation? Do you know that you're saved? Do you know Jesus? How firm is your faith? How strong is your faith? How well are you going to stand? How sure are you of your faith in Jesus Christ? And point number 3, Jesus is buried. What does your faith look like now? Think about these disciples. They walked around with Jesus for 3 years. They walked with him, ate with him, slept in the same places, done all these amazing things, and now suddenly Jesus is buried. What is going on in their minds? What's going on in yours? How has your faith changed knowing that the Son of God went to the cross for your sins? When your rabbi is buried, when your king is gone, how is your faith? That's it, guys.